Professor Aaron Gross, Vegan, Dismantling Animal People Factories in the US, Part 1 of 2. Today, we meet with Dr. Aaron Gross, a vegan professor in the Theology and Religious Studies Department at the University of San Diego in the US, who has been devoted exclusively to putting an end to animal people raising factories. As well as being an advocate for animal people, he is also an internationally respected expert on animal people and religion. He is currently serving on the Faith Advisory Council of the Humane Society of the United States. Dr. Gross is on a mission to eradicate animal people raising in the United States. He says that once people have an accurate and clear picture of what's really going on in this gruesome industry, they will choose to stop supporting it. The professor talks about the broken relationship between humans and animal people, which is expressed very clearly in how we treat animal people as a food commodity.
In many ways, the different kind of power and responsibility that humans have. I can shape the lives of many animals just by virtue of being, a member of this species. Humans seem to be able to work at large scales of cooperation in flexible ways. And at first, it doesn't sound like much, but that's what allows you and me here to be on satellite television, coordinating with, literally millions of people. That's something that's very unique to be able to work in these really large numbers, but do it in flexible, creative ways. So ants and bees can work together in huge numbers, but they seem to have a pretty limited repertoire. Our chimpanzee and gorilla and elephant mammal colleagues seem to be able to cooperate in very sophisticated ways, but they don't do it in thousands and tens of thousands and millions. That seems to be this uniquely human thing, which of course goes back to that first thing I mentioned, which is our power and our responsibility in the way we shape the planet.
Dr. Gross explains that the broken relationship between humans and animal people shows up in what he calls the constant horror show that is the animal people raising industry.
We really have a constant horror show. I think eating is a very fundamental thing. I think it shapes our personality. It materially shapes the world. In basic ways, like it shapes our atmosphere. It determines the microbiome that shapes the diseases we get. Like the human-animal relationship is just absolutely profound. And the biggest one is the relationship we have with the animals that are involved in agriculture. And currently, with meat eating being the way it is and industrial farming dominating, we just have this incredible fracture in human-animal relationships. No matter what your ethical system is, we live in a nightmare right now where a kind of farming that is really predicated upon animal suffering is the norm. And what that means is it's the norm in our daily lives to contribute to a kind of oppressive system, one that very directly causes animal suffering and then indirectly causes tremendous human suffering. So I see the human-animal relationship as deeply broken right now, and one of our greatest challenges is to find a way of altering the trajectory we're on.
Dr. Aaron Gross, as well as the tremendous suffering inflicted upon animal people in the meat industry, there are many other sinister repercussions that affect every corner of society.
Farming has so many problematic aspects. In some ways, the most striking thing is how many different issues of our day converge in factory farming, where most obviously there's tremendous animal suffering, and then it doesn't take us too long to realize there's tremendous ecological damage. It's the largest contributor to climate change when we look at things globally. In the United States here, apparently, the cars are worse, but in the global context, it's literally our eating of animals, which is the major driver of climate change. And then we could go on to the way in which it's impacting human communities, the way in which it's tied in the US to various racist practices that are exploiting poor people, the way in which factory farms are located in places where they essentially destroy land values, pollute the air in ways that make people sick.
Dr. Gross talks about how the animal people raising industry is connected with the likelihood of pandemic diseases. He says that COVID has been a wake-up call to the reality of how profoundly we are all connected with the larger environment.
One of the kind of facts that is now in wide discussion because of coronavirus is that most of the new diseases that human beings are facing are what the scientists call zoonotic. That is, they are diseases that are from organisms that are moving between humans and animals, from viruses or other sorts of little microorganisms that don't just stay with one species, but move between them. So the Center for Disease Control in the United States estimates that 3 out of every 4 new and emerging infectious diseases is zoonotic. So what they're basically telling us is 75% of all infectious disease of any kind is tied to our relationship with animals and what's going on in the animal world. And what that means very specifically is agriculture, because the relationship with animals that is at the large enough scale to really shape, for better or for worse, pandemic risk is our relationship with farmed animals. And factory farming is the perfect recipe for increasing pandemic risk. And things can be much worse than the coronavirus.
Dr. Gross explains how the extreme concentration of animal people in the meat and dairy industry is a recipe for disaster in the face of contagious disease.
The United States has this peculiar name for factory farming. We call them confined animal feeding operations. That's the legal term that the USDA uses to regulate them. Confined and concentrated. This is the definition of a factory farm. So the first move that industrial farming does is a risk for the creation of a viral mutation. But it doesn't stop there. The factory farm goes further. It wants the animals to be genetically uniform. So this increases the risk further. It's as if we were in a population where one person got the virus, almost certainly everybody else is gonna get it. That's an additional risk factor. And then beyond that, the conditions on factory farm mean the animals are chronically sick. They're ill, they're suffering, their immune systems are compromised. And so they are more likely to get sick in the first place. So we're literally doing the opposite of all the things that everyone now knows are what you would do if you want to reduce the likelihood of viral mutation. We're just creating a petri dish. And the reason we're not addressing it is because of an incredibly powerful lobby, an incredible amount of money, which is being made by this industry. It's a totally different game. And the folks who are running the meat industry now are running it in a way which is causing a slow-moving disaster.
According to Dr. Gross, the animal people raising industry is causing immense suffering and ecological damage, and is also a key instrument of racism in the United States.
Industrial farming is really a key instrument of racism in this country, and the way in which we have to recognize the industrial farm as one of the pillars that supports the exploitation of Black and brown people in the United States. And this was particularly profoundly visible in the pandemic.
Dr. Gross explains the impact on the workers' lives in the industry when they were declared an essential service during the pandemic.
They used strong-arm tactics to force people back to arm by threatening their livelihoods and their work. People were forced back to work, and we saw most or many of the COVID hotspots in the entire United States coming out of slaughterhouses towns. And this was duplicated globally. We have to realize this wasn't just workers who were getting this. These were virtually entirely people of color. This is an issue of race and racism. The meat industry uses racism to run a dirty business, and it shows up most profoundly in the way that the slaughter and processing industry is run. The industry is doing this blatantly. It's deeply broken, and I think most of us know something is wrong, but we don't realize just how destructive the factory farmed industry is.
Deeply concerned by the multifaceted destruction by the animal people raising industry, in 2007, Dr. Gross founded the non-profit Farm Forward, a coalition of strategists that is working to end all animal people raising factories in the US. In 2017, Dr. Gross also founded the Better Food Foundation, a non-profit organization that is solely focused on working for vegan diet change in individuals, institutions, and our culture. Through grant-making, advocacy campaigns, and building coalitions, the Better Food Foundation has been supporting other groups, leaders, and initiatives, especially in communities of color, religious institutions, and academia. For example, through its successful advocacy campaign called Default Veg, the foundation has enlisted at least 48 institutions, such as Harvard University's Office of Sustainability, to make plant-based meals their default at their events and cafeterias. This method has been shown to motivate diners to increase their choice of veg options by an average of 60%, thus greatly reducing animal people consumption. Learn more about Dr. Aaron Groves' nonprofit organizations. Please visit betterfoodfoundation.org and farmforward.com.